चलिए Good morning to all of you and welcome back to Career Launcher IAS. This is Preeti Sagar and I'm going to discuss all such important editorials that had published in The Hindu and Indian Express in past 1 week. So first article that we'll move on to that is about COP26, which is yet to happen in the month of November. So November is going to start, and with this, COP26, that is Conference of Parties 26th meeting, is yet to happen. And this time it becomes very, very important because it will basically look after what countries are doing regarding the commitments, what they have done in Paris Agreement, Paris Climate Meet, and what should be the future framework for climate change and future framework for the mitigation of climate related issues, what countries or world is facing. And another thing is what is important in India's perspective, that is what is going to be the role of India to mitigate climate or to tackle the issue of climate in the country. So this article is basically discussing about that. So the heading is what? In Glasgow, all eyes on 2030. So 2030 was the year that has been set as a target year in Paris Agreement. COP26 must focus sharply on reducing emissions till 2030 rather than on net zero 2050, which is too distant a goal. So this article, the focus of this article is what? That countries need to focus on 2030 target rather going and declaring themselves as net zero for 2050. So 2050 is very, very far away. 2030 is nearby. So many things can be done in the short target year or in the short span of time. And if such a large target countries will take up, so there might be many chances that they would not be able to work efficiently on this. So it is better to focus on 2030, not on 2050 or net zero. So context of this article is what? That set is all, the stage is all set for the 26th UN Climate Meet or UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties 26, which is going to happen in Glasgow starting 31st October. So today is the initiation day of this COP26. So major preparatory conferences and bilateral meetings have been held to persuade countries to raise their emission reduction commitments from the nationally determined contributions under Paris Agreement. So countries, they committed that they will work or they will reduce carbon emissions from their countries and they will work accordingly as nationally determined contributions under Paris Agreement. So some positive outcomes had been achieved and many high emitter countries, they are somewhere short of emissions reductions by 2030 to restrict global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius. So that was a target that countries they will reduce their carbon emission, and it will basically try to minimize global temperature by 2 degrees Celsius. Or now de facto goal is what? 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. So the temperature had increased. So this reduction will be taken place at the pre-industrial level. So minus 2 degrees Celsius, first it had talked about, but now they are working for reduction of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So loudest buzz now is around the net zero emission by 2050, that is greenhouse gas emissions equaling absorption by sinks like forest, even though the substance is much less than slogan suggests. So basically here, what countries have shifted? They have a sideline 2030 target, what had been said into a Paris Agreement. And now they have started singing the song of net zero emission by 2050. So basically, what is net zero? Whatever emission will be produced or whatever carbon emission will be produced in the country, these countries who has declared net zero target, so they will create sink or come up with the sequestration method, carbon sequestration method, so that all such carbons had been produced will be sunk down. All right, that is what net zero is. So media reports and commentary in India and abroad had greeted sixth assessment report of International Panel on Climate Change. That was IPCC report that came in August 2021, and it had shocked the world. Okay, but it revealed scientific data. So far from emphasizing net zero alone, this sixth assessment report has emphasized that to keep temperature rise within 1.5 degrees Celsius, global emission should be reduced by 45% from 2010 level by 2030 on the way to net zero 2050. So it is important in this net zero drumbeat, which has spurred by USA and UN Secretary General foundational principle of UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is common but differential responsibilities, has been forgotten. So this common but differential responsibility, what is the meaning of common but differential? Basically, what is the common goal? Common goal is by 2030, every country has to reduce or has to reduce carbon emission in their countries, and so that they can minimize the temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius, earlier to 2 degrees Celsius, and later on 1.5 degrees Celsius at the pre-industrial level. That is common goal. Okay, what is differential goal? Differential goal, as per the developed and developing countries, what are their basically work or functions? Okay, how they are going to do it. So this is what common but differential um, responsibilities. So developed countries, they are responsible for over 75% of accumulated atmospheric greenhouse gas, which causing climate change. So that should shoulder most of the burden for reducing emissions. And developing countries, they should do what they can with technological and financial assistance from the developed countries. So basically, developed countries, because these developed countries are named as developed on the basis of industrial revolution. So because of industrial revolution, this global emission or global temperature had increased. So they are responsible for 75% of accumulation of atmospheric greenhouse gases. So they have some responsibility. Then developing countries, this is the time of their development. All right, so these developing countries, they should also focus on climate change, and they should also function for this. But how they can do that? They can get fund from the developed countries and technological transfer as well. So if goal is global net zero emission by 2050, all countries cannot be obliged to reach that goal by the same year. And this common but differential responsibility would imply that developed countries should reach net zero by 2035 to 40, while developing countries can get there later. So net zero 2050, as currently has posed, is at best a distracting message, and at worst deliberately diverts attention away from the urgent 2030 target that COP26 should focus on. And the net zero 2050 target is also no proverbial silver bullet, as has clearly shown by numbers that has been put out in United National Framework Convention on Climate Change synthesis report on the updated nationally determined contributions, which had been released in the month of September. So 113 parties out of 194, they have submitted this updated NDCs sorry by the end of July 2021. And United Nations National Determined Contribution Report has told that even accounting for these, global emission in 2030 are expected to be 16.3% above 2010 level. And at the other side, IPCC has called for 2030 emissions to be 45% less from 2010 levels for 1.5 degrees goal. So report therefore calls for a significant increase in the level of ambition of NDCs till 2030. And several large emitters have announced deeper emission cuts than in the Paris Agreement. So UK and European Union, they have raised their target to significantly. Their target will be 68%. That will be UK's, and 55% of European Union, as compared to 1990 and level by 2030. It means they have taken this base year as 1990. So whatever temperature was there in 1990, whatever emission, sorry, not temperature, emission was there in the 1990 in UK and European Union, they will minimize that reduction by 68% at 55%. So, US is still lagging behind. Even US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, that is John Kerry, has toured the world pushing other countries to deeper emission cuts. And US has now promised net zero emissions by 2050, which is compared to 80% reduction that it had promised earlier. So Biden administration had promised to reduce emission by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. And this is grossly insufficient at USA in the world's second largest emitter. So USA is world's second largest emitter, and 2005 baseline makes its commitment considerably lower than those of EU and UK and others using the Kyoto 1990 baseline. So others standing in the way of rapid reductions are Russia, Brazil, under Jair Bolsonaro, that is ravaging the Amazon forest, and China, who's the world's largest emitter, whose relentless push to add maximum infrastructure, industrial, and power generation capacities before peaking in 2030 may use up much of the cumulative global emissions available for 1.5 degrees Celsius. So, gravity of this situation that may be better appreciated through more scientific metric of carbon budgets, which has been highlighted in sixth and fifth year assessment report of IPCC. And carbon budgets that has represented quantum of carbon dioxide the atmosphere can hold for a given global temperature, which can be best assessed through cumulative emissions and not actual flows of it. So report of updated NDCs that is stating that cumulative carbon dioxide emissions in 2020 to 2030 based on the latest national determined contributions, that is NDCs, and they would likely use up 89% of the remaining carbon budget. It will leave a post 2030 carbon budget of around 55 gigaton of carbon dioxide, that is equivalent to the average annual carbon dioxide emissions in 2020-2030. So negotiators and analysts, they are steeped in using annual flows of carbon basically. So estimates based on carbon budgets that should be used at Glasgow, if only to assess flows based arrangements arrived at. So as NDC report says, reaching net zero is necessary to stabilize global temperature rise at a particular level, but limiting global temperature increase to a specific level would imply limiting cumulative carbon dioxide emissions to within a carbon budget. So short-term target need to set. So to reiterate, this 26th COP must focus sharply on reduction of emissions till 2030 rather than on net zero 2050, which is very distant and with possibilities of gaming the system. So if this 26th COP does not focus on achieving the 45% emissions cuts from 2010 levels, which is required by 2030 for limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and continues with geopolitics as usual, then the world may well have squandered away one of its last chances to avert disastrous climate impacts. So pressure will come from Africa, which is least developed countries, small island states, and others, but it will tilt the scales against the powerful status quo. So it was suggested some years ago that COP ensures that parties iteratively raise their commitments till they add up to the requisite 45% reduction by 2030. But who will hold their feet to the fire? Or will the USA and others succeed in focusing on the false net zero 2050 solution, escaping their own obligations for 2030 and dangerously kicking the can down the road? So, as usual, India is in its own double edged position. Country, I mean India, that is emitting 7% of global emissions, and it is extremely low per capita emission that are far below the global average, and it ranks as world's third largest emitter. So if India is also G20 member, and its reputed economy and industrial power it is having. So India has so far resisted pressure to raise its Paris Agreement emission reduction commitments, but it has not yet submitted its updated NDC, as required and may face difficulties at Glasgow, especially from least developed countries and most vulnerable countries who feel existentially threatened even as powerful nations wheel and deal. So, well-known website that is Climate Tracker has now placed India in its second worst performing category of countries regarding conformity with global 1.5 degrees Celsius goals, down from the top category of 2 degrees Celsius just after Paris Agreement. So India can, without much difficulty, raise its NDC pledge of reducing emissions intensity, that is ratio of emission to GDP, by 33 to 35% from 2005 level by 2030 to 38 to 40%. So this is quite achievable since India has been averaging around 2% per annum reduction in the carbon dioxide as per the per its own NDC, that is emission intensity. So net zero chorus in this India could also offer to achieve that by 2070-75, which will invoking common but differential responsibilities, and it will compare well with China's 2060 pledge. So, if pressed on a peaking year, that is a 2045, this estimate may not be far off the mark, especially if increasing forest and tree cover are stepped up instead of undermined. So, for India to convert its ambitions of installing 450 gigawatt of renewable power by 2030, adding green hydrogen for increasing electric vehicles into commitments may require more homework than done so far. All right. So this is all about this article. So basically here it has discussed what India need to do. So India need to focus on 2030 target, that is a reduction of carbon emission at 2005 level by 33 to 35% of it. Then it will be able to achieve 2030 target. Then we can talk about net zero emission or net zero target. All right. So India has, so at the end it is discussed that India has started working on this 450 gigawatt of renewable power India will achieve by 2030, and it will add green hydrogen or vehicle electric vehicle um, uh, has been intensified in India. So these are commitment towards Paris Agreement, what India has done and India is doing in that way. Now, next article. India's Central Asian outreach, Afghanistan's situation has thrown up challenges for New Delhi. So basically, what India should do in Central Asia and here as well, Taliban or its influence on democracy can be seen. So, context is what dramatic developments in Afghanistan have catalyzed new geostrategic and geoeconomic concerns for the region. So, evolving situation has also thrown up renewed challenges for India's regional and bilateral ties with Central Asia and Caucasus, prompting India to recalibrate its rules of engagement with the region. So, External Affairs Minister of India, that is S. Jaishankar, he was in the region earlier this month, and that was his third meeting within 4 months. So, in Kyrgyzstan, our External Affairs Minister has extended a credit line of $200 million. And if with this credit support, they will develop projects and signed an memorandum of understanding on high impact community development projects. Then his next stop was Kazakhstan capital, that was Nur Sultan, and here he attended 6th Foreign Ministers Conference on interaction and confidence building measures in Asia. Then at CICA, he targeted China's Belt and Road Initiative and admonizing China's methods in sorry, admonishing China's methods in promoting the Belt and Road Initiative. He said, while greater connectivity was essential for the promotion of regional stability, it must not be pursued for parochial interest. And he also confronted Pakistan for its support towards cross-border border terrorism. But before reaching Armenia on 13th October, External Affairs Minister met his counterparts from Russia and Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan to discuss regional cooperation. So Jaishankar has also become first Indian external affairs minister to visit Armenia, and he and his Armenian counterpart, that is Ararat Mirzoyan, he agreed to enhance trade and cultural exchanges so that it can boost bilateral relations between both the countries. So during visit, he also criticized efforts for a peaceful solution of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between um, Azerbaijan and Armenia under Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe's Minsk group. So these two countries had some clashes, and India has also supported its effort for political solution. So Taliban has re-established its supremacy over Afghanistan, and it has also exposed weaknesses of the coalitions like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because Afghanistan is one of the members of it. Then it has created in response to the threats of terrorism that sprang from Afghanistan. So this Shanghai Cooperation Agreement that had been used by member countries and for their own regional geostrategic and security interest, that increasing the trust deficit and divergence within the forum. So Shanghai Cooperation Organization has failed to collectively respond to the Afghan crisis. And Central Asian leaders, they met in Turkmenistan in August, and so in the month of August, they met in Turkmenistan. Just a moment. Yeah. And they had voiced their concerns over Afghan situation, and they also discussed about the presence of Central Asian terror groups within Afghanistan and along the borders. So after breaking up of Soviet Union and formation of independent republics in Central Asia, India had reset its ties with the strategically critical region, that is Central Asian countries. And India has also provided financial aid to the region, and it has established diplomatic relationship. So India signed strategic partnership agreement with Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, and it has stimulated defense cooperation and deepened the trade relations between the countries. So in 2012, India's Connect Central Asia policy had aimed at furthering India's political, economic, historical, and cultural connections with the region. And India's efforts were stonewalled by Pakistan's lack of willingness to allow India passage through its territories. So China had taken this advantage of the situation and unveiled the much hyped BRI in Kazakhstan. So growing geostrategic and security concerns regarding Belt and Road Initiative, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and its violation of India's sovereignty forced India has to fix its lethargic strategy towards it. Soon after assuming office, our Prime Minister has visited all the Central Asian countries in July 2015. And eventually, Central Asia became link that placed Eurasia in India's zone of interest. And India has signed MOUs with Iran in 2015 to develop the Chabahar port in Sistan Balochistan region or province that was in the doldrums from 2003. And most of the Central Asian leaders, they have viewed India's Chabahar port as an opportunity to diversify their export markets and control China's ambitions. So China's assertive approach that led to rising social discontent on the ill treatment of their ethnic brethren in neighboring Xinjiang and China, Central Asian countries that had been keen to have India as a partner, as they have sought to diversify their strategic ties. They have admitted New Delhi into Ashgabat Agreement, which has allowed India to access to connectivity networks to facilitate trade and commercial interactions with both Central Asia as well as Eurasia, and also access the natural resources of the region. So, with the rising anti Chinese sentiments within the region and security threats from Taliban, has allowed India and Central Asia to reimagine their agreement or engagement. So, India cannot afford to lose any time to recalibrate its regional engagements with the Central Asia. That is all about this. article. Next article is a reminder that India still trails in the hunger fight. The government's objection to the methodology of Global Hunger Index is not based on facts. So basically, one article we discussed in the past week when Global Hunger Index had released, and it has somewhere India's performance had shown very, very weak or very, very worst. So India is saying the parameters which has used for the ranking is superficial, it is not real, and there are some issues in this. So this article is talking about that. So methodology of global hunger index, India has said that it is not correct. All right. So this sorry. Global Hunger Report has made headlines in India for countries' poor ranking in terms of Global Hunger Index, and this report has ranked India 101 out of 116, and with the country who has failed in the category of having a serious hunger situation. So ranks are not comparable across years because of various methodological issues, and it is wrong to say that India's standing has fallen from 94 out of 107 in 2020. And it is true that year after year, India's ranks at the lower end, which is below a number of other countries that are poorer in terms of per capita incomes. So this in itself is cause for concern. The government of India, through a press release, has refuted Global Hunger Index, and it has claimed that it is devoid of ground reality and it is based on unscientific methodology. So basically, four parameters or four indicators this Global Hunger Index sees, that is percentage of undernourished in the population, percentage of children under 5 years who suffers from wasting is low weight for height, then percentage of children under 5 years who suffered um, stunting, that is low height for age, and percentage of children who die before the age of child mortality. So the first and last indicators have a weight of one third each, and two child malnutrition indicators account for one sixth weightage each in the final greenhouse gas emission, where each indicator is standardized based on threshold that sits slightly above the highest country level values. And if we look at each of these indicators separately, India has shown a worsening in percentage of undernourished, basically, and childhood wasting is in comparison with 2012. So if so, that is this POU figure of 15.3 percentage for the year 2018-20 that government is contesting for. Now, objection on methodology by India. So government's objection to the methodology that they have based their assessment on the result of 4 questions opinion poll that was conducted telephonically by Gallup, which is not based on the facts. It means telephonic survey has been taken. On that basis, this ranking has been done. So report is not based on Gallup poll. Rather, it is on the POU, that is percentage of undernourished data, that Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations puts out regularly, as has been clarified by the publishing agencies. So this percentage of undernourished, as per FAO, is an estimate of the proportion of population whose habitual food consumption is insufficient to provide the dietary energy levels that are required to maintain a normal, active, and healthy life. So, this POU is estimated taking into account a number of factors like food availability, food consumption patterns, income levels and distributions, population structure, etc. So on such basis, this undernourishment data can get. So all the data used are from official data sources of respective national governments, and in the absence of food consumption data is in most countries. Just a moment. Just a moment. All right, I'm really sorry. So, yeah, so there are certain factors on which this estimation of POE has taken place, and the data which is used, which had been used, these are official data source, which are official data which has been taken from government sources. So, in the absence of food consumption data in most of the countries, this indicator is an estimate which is based on modeling exercise, which uses available data, and there is some margin of error. So most of the criticism of the FAO's POU data has been about how it underestimates hunger rather than over. So, so there is a scope for a valid discussion on this methodology of Global Hunger Index and its limitations as well. So this objection by government is not warranted. So main message of this global hunger report is to is to once again remind us that India has not been very successful in tackling the issue of hunger, and that the rate of progress is very slow. So comparable values of index have been given in the report for 4 years, that is 2006, 2012, and 2021. So the this global hunger index has improved from 37.4 to 28.8 during 2006 to 12. Improvement is only from 28.8 to 27.5 between 2012 to 21. And this percentage of undernourished data has shown that proportion of undernourished population had showed a declining trend up to 2016-18, when it reached the lowest level of 13.8 percentage, after which there is an increase to 14% for 2017-19 and 15.3 percentage for 2018-20. So other data that also broadly validate these findings and partial results of the National Family Health Survey 5, which had taken place in 2019-20, that has also shown stunting and wasting indicators have stagnated or declined for most states for which data is available. So leaked report of the consumption expenditure survey has also showed that rural consumption had fallen between 2012-18 and urban consumption had showed a very slight increase. So it must also be remembered that all the data are for the period before COVID-19 pandemic, and there were many indications based on nationally representative data like data from Center for Monitoring Indian Economy and various field surveys which has conducted by research organizations, academics, civil society groups. So it is the situation of food insecurity at the end of year 2020 was concerning, and things are most likely to have become worse after the second wave. So many of these surveys find that over 60% of the respondents says that they are eating less than before the national lockdown in 2020, and services like integrated child development scheme and school midday meals, that has continued to be disrupted in many of the areas. So it has denied crores of children the one nutritious meal a day they earlier had access to before COVID-19. So it would not be surprising if national surveys, if hopefully if it will get conducted soon, so shows a further slowdown in improvement in malnutrition. And novel coronavirus pandemic has affected food security and nutrition across the world. So in countries like India, where situation was already poor to begin with, the impact is probably worse, and the response cannot be one of denial. Rather, what is needed are measures to ensure rapid recovery. It has been pointed out by many that the relief measures of the government have been inadequate in comparison to the scale of the problem. So, a substantial measure that has been the provision of additional free food grains through public distribution system, and even this has been lacking. So, it has left out somewhere 40% of the population, and many of these people are in need, and they include only cereals. So as of now, it ends in November 2021, and at the same time, inflation in other foods like edible oils had also been very, very high, which has affected people's ability to afford healthy diets. So on the one hand, while we need additional investments and greater priority for food, nutrition, and social protection schemes, Budget 2021 has saw cuts in real terms for schemes like ICDS, that is Integrated Child Development Service, and Midday Meal Scheme. An argument that that global hunger index is an indicator of undernutrition and not hunger is only diverting attention away from more substantial issues. And of course, if we see, malnutrition is affected by a number of factors like health, sanitation, etc., other than food consumption alone. But there is no way, no means that healthy diets are not central. And it is no denying that diverse, nutritious diets for all Indians still remain a distant dream. So here, basically, because India's performance had been marked very bad because of the data availability, India has objected onto it that methodology is not wrong. But as per the survey conducted over the telephone and as per the data given by the different government sources, so this is not wrong. All right. And this global hunger index, it is not only about hunger, but it is also about nutrition, because nutrition and hunger, these are interrelated. So basically, we should not deny to diverse, nutritious diets for Indians who are in the need. Because if we will deny it, then the achievement of the let's say reduction of hunger, or what was that, that SDG one, SDG goal one. So it is about reduction of hunger from the world by 2030. So it will be, or it will remain a distant dream for India to mitigate hunger or eliminate hunger, basically. So this is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. So, a festering crisis in Park Strait, a moratorium on both trawling and support to the fishermen is a good first step towards a solution. So basically, this article is talking about the situation between India and Sri Lanka, where fishermen from both the sides, they cross the border and they cross the they enter into the maritime boundary of the countries, vice versa, and situation of tension arises between both the countries. So, context of this article is what? That fishermen's death had served as a stark reminder of the unresolved fisheries conflict that festered in the barely 30-mile wide, which is its narrowest point in the Park Strait. Park Strait, that is a strait between India and Sri Lanka. So problem had existed for more than a decade now, from the time Sri Lanka's 30-year-long civil war ended in 2009. So since 2009, this problem remains. So that was when island's northern Tamil fishermen, they are basically Indian Tamilians who had been taken to Sri Lanka as plantation workers, and they have settled over there. So India's northern Tamil fishermen who were displaced, and they barred access to the sea. So they began returning to their old homes with the hope of reviving their livelihoods and resurrecting their lives. So their return had marked beginning of new tensions between Tamil fishermen on the other side of the sea, and this has posed a serious threat to their livelihoods, fishing gear, and marine resources on which they are relying. So in Tamil Nadu, the daily wage fishermen, they are too aware of the risk that come with working on the mechanized fishing vessels used for bottom trawling. Trawling, that is a method for fishing. So their wage depends on the catch they bring back. And using the bottom trawling fishing method, they drag large fishing nets along the seabed, scooping out of huge quantity of prawns, small fishes, and virtually everything else at one go. So practice has deemed destructive to the world over. It has ensured sizable profits for the employers and vessel owners, and small income for the fishermen that who takes their life at risk. So incessant bottom trawling along the coast of Tamil Nadu over the years, it has meant that fishermen are drawn to the relatively resource-rich Sri Lankan water, and this pushes them into a cycle of arrest, remand, release, and in other unfortunate cases like violence or death at sea. So Sri Lankan state's response to the problem has been largely a military and legal one. It has tasked its navy with patrolling the seas and arrested encroachers. It has banned trawling and levied stiffness on foreign vessels who are engaged in lifting fishing in its territorial waters. So little support has been extended to the war-affected artisanal fishermen in the northern province by way of infrastructure or equipment by Sri Lankan government. So despite such accumulation of big losses, fishermen has received no assistance even during pandemic-induced lockdown months. And Hefty penalty on foreign vessels has proved a deterrent, at least temporarily, but over the last few months, northern fishermen have sighted Indian trawlers frequently, especially when Sri Lankan Navy has relaxed its patrol and it has feared import of COVID-19 infections among the fishermen. So India and Sri Lanka have held many rounds of bilateral talks on this in the last decade between government officials as well as fisher leaders. And the outcome of these talks have mostly ranged from deadlocks, with Tamil Nadu refusing to give up bottom trawling to template response from the government, with India seeking a humanitarian response from Sri Lanka. And the closest that the two countries came to reaching a solution was in November 2016, followed a meeting in New Delhi, which has led by foreign and fisheries ministers from both the sides with other key interlocutors. So, a joint working group had formed. They constituted to first and foremost expedite the transition towards ending the practice of bottom trawling at the earliest. An Indian government's attempt to divert fishermen to deep sea fishing has not taken off as it was envisaged, even as profit hungry boat owners in Tamil Nadu had stubbornly defended their trawler trade. And meanwhile, Tamil Nadu fishermen they continue to allege that Sri Lankan Navy is unleashing violence on them. Sri Lanka has denied it. So 5 years since that incident, we are at a rather lower point in fisheries conflict with rising human cost. And meanwhile, that could be the biggest test yet to solidarity that Tamil Nadu continues to express with Sri Lankan Tamils who bore the brunt of civil war and still await justice and a political solution. So, by now, it is evident that bottom trawling has maximized not only the profits made by the vessel owners in Tamil Nadu, but also the risk faced by poor daily wage fishermen who are employed from the coastal districts. So, here, rich owners and those employed by them for meager wage, they ought not to be clumped together simply as Tamil Nadu fishermen without recognition that their interest and risk differ enormously. So it is equally well known that relentless trawling by Indian vessels has caused huge losses to northern Sri Lankan fishermen, and their catch of fishes has fallen drastically, and they count vanishing varieties of fish. So they are dejected as their persisting calls to end bottom trawling have not been heeded by their counterparts in Tamil Nadu, or brothers as they repeatedly call them. So, for politicians and activists in Tamil Nadu, the death of fishermen is understandably the most outrageous, emotive dimensions of the complex problem, especially since no past case has been probed or perpetrator held accountable. So, all the same, seeing the conflict merely through the prism of Tamil Nadu fishermen and Sri Lankan Navy may not yield a solution to the problem, although that might keep its most deplorable symptoms in focus. So, at the heart of the conflict is a tale of completing or competing livelihoods in a narrow stretch of the sea, amid a looming environmental threat and a glaring asymmetry of power, whether it is these are numbers, equipment of or political backing between two Tamil-speaking fishing communities. So, growing trust deficit between them doesn't augur well with the prospect of a solution. And both the countries they urgently need to refocus their energies to address this killing of fishermen crisis. So, at the very first step should be that Tamil Nadu must consider a moratorium on bottom trawling at the park in the Park Strait, and a move must be accompanied by both the countries substantially by supporting their respective fishing communities that can cope up with the suspension of trawling on Tamil Nadu side and devastating impact of the pandemic on both the sides. So time must be used for evolving a lasting solution. Strong bilateral ties are not only about shared religious or cultural heritage, but also about sharing resource responsibilities in ways that lives and livelihoods of our people can be protected. So that is all about this article. Next, moving on to the next one. Why India should not sign on to net zero? Doing so would be to accede to further over appropriation of global carbon budget by a few. So this is another article on climate change. So first we talked about COP26, and here this article is talking about why India should not focus on 2050 target or net zero target like other countries. So context is what that this net zero campaign by a number of countries and non-state actors, the timing of the world's carbon dioxide emission has reached net zero is not the critical parameter of the safety of humanity. And the recent report of IPCC has made that clear that limiting the increase in the world's average temperature from pre-industrial levels to those who agreed in the Paris Agreement requires global cumulative emissions of carbon dioxide need to be capped at the global carbon budget. And it is a truism that such a cap means that eventually emissions must go to zero, or more precisely, net zero. So reaching net zero by itself is irrelevant to forestalling dangerous warming. And there is no more rocket science than saying that the promise of when you will turn off the tap does not guarantee that you will draw only a specified quality of water. So here, basically, the context of this article is what that IPCC has already shown what is the situation of climate. All right, and it has said to limit the increase in world's average temperature from the pre-industrial level, which has been agreed in Paris Agreement. And for this, it needed cumulative emission of carbon dioxide need to be capped at the global carbon budget. So this cap means that emissions must go to zero, or you can say net zero. Whatever we are producing, that has to be sunken. So it is saying that doing this or working on this is not rocket science. Okay, putting the or tapping it off doesn't guarantee that we will draw only quality water. So top three emitters of the world, these are USA, EU, and China. China, USA, and EU. So after taking account of their net zero commitments and their enhanced emission reduction commitments for 2030, will emit more than 500 billion tons of carbon dioxide before net zero. It means they have set their target 2050, 2045, 2060. So before this, they are going to produce 500 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So these three alone will exceed the limit of about 500 billion tons from 2020 onwards for even odds of keeping global temperature increase below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So with these committed emissions, there is no hope of keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius alive, and target is dead on arrival for 2-to-1 odds for the same target. The limit is 400 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That is a limit which is even more certain to be breached. So neither Paris Agreement nor climate science requires that net zero be reached individually by countries by 2050. The former requiring only global achievement of this goal and in the second half of the century. So claims that world must reach specific goals by 2030 or 2050 are the product of specified economic models for climate action. And these are designed to achieve Paris goals by the lowest cuts methods, foregoing equity and climate justice. So they front load emission reduction requirements on developing countries, despite their already low emissions, allow the developed world to backload its own, buying time for its own transition. And these stringent limits on future cumulative emissions post 2020 amount to less than a fifth of the total global carbon budget, which is the result of its considerable over appropriation in the past by the global north. So less than a fifth of the world has been responsible for 3/5 of all the past cumulative emissions. US and EU, they alone have contributed to somewhere 45% of carbon emission, and promising of net zero in their account from perpetuate this that form perpetuate this hugely disproportionate appropriation of global commons while continuing to place humanity in the harm's way. So So if we talk about India's commitment, so India's emission story cannot be bracketed with the top three emitters of the world. And India is responsible for no more than 4.37% cumulative emissions of the carbon dioxide since pre-industrial era. And it is, even though it is home to more than a sixth of humanity. So India's per capita emission are less than half of the world's average and less than one eighth of the USA's, and have shown no dramatic increase like China's post 2000. So for India to declare net zero is to accede to further over appropriation of the global carbon budget by a few, and its contribution to global emission in both stock and flow is so disproportionately low that any sacrifice on its part can do nothing to save the world, nor can it proceed with the expectation that the developed world and China would limit their emissions further in the future. So, in such expectations were belied, it would endanger the future of its own population, subjecting it to unprecedented hardship, failure of the developed world to meet its pre 2020 obligations, along with its refusal to acknowledge this, provides little confidence for the future. So, allocation of property rights without grandfathering is essential to ensure equitable access to any global commons. And the global carbon budget that has been subjected to no such restrictions has allowed the developed countries to exploit it fully in the past and in the present. Only China, from among the rest, has managed to surmount this barrier to access, and India is enlightened self-interest must now stake its claim to a fair share of the global carbon budget. Technology transfers and financial support, together with negative emissions, if later succeeds, can compensate for the loss of the past. So, in the absence of such a claim, India's considerable current efforts at mitigation are a washed effort, only easing the way for the continued over exploitation of the global commons by a few. Such a claim by India has provided its greater and much needed long term options that enabled the responsible use of coal, its major fossil fuel resource, and uh, uh, oil and gas to bootstrap itself out of lower middle income economy status and eradicate poverty, hunger, and malnutrition for the good. So India's resource trapped small industry sector that provides employment and livelihoods to the majority of the population outside agriculture needs expansion and modernization. An agriculture sector, which is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions for India after energy, that needs to double its productivity and farmers' income and build resilience. Infrastructure for climate resilience in general is critical to future adaptation to climate change. And all of these will require at least the limited fossil fuel resources, which is made available through a fair share of the carbon budget. So, developed countries and China, on the other hand, if they are serious about the Paris Agreement targets, they must reach net zero well before 2050. And the target of 2 degrees Celsius is, there is more room for the rest of the world since the cumulative emission limit for it with the same even odds, that is 1,350 billion tons of carbon dioxide. So, without restriction of their future cumulative emissions by big emitters to their fair share of the global carbon budget and the corresponding temperatures target that they correspond to made clear, India cannot sign on to net zero. And even if India were to enhance its short-term national development contributions under Paris Agreement in some fashion, unnecessary as of now, it should do so while taking a claim of its share of the global commons. So it will ensure that its efforts will not further enable the trending of or rewriting of the developed world and protect its access to the strategic resources vital to India's industrial and developmental future. So basically, the strategic resource of India is what? That is renewable sources of energy. India is moving towards, and India should emphasize upon it. So if it will do so, if it will also come into this trap of net zero target, then no vital decisions will be taken, and no it will not be vital for India's industrial as well as developmental future. That is all about this article. The next one. Preparing for outbreaks, the Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission aims to build a robust public health infrastructure. So basically, this article is talking about Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission and why it is important for the public health infrastructure. So context of this article is what that COVID-19 overburdened countries' health system and services had been. And early months of the outbreak was particularly taxing the states with weaker health system. And the inability of private sector to share the burden has driven out the point home that healthcare services cannot be left to independent forces. So, what should be the aim of the scheme? Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission. So, Pradhan Mantri Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission is another addition to the arsenal that we have to prepare for such outbreaks in the future. And that had been launched with an outlay of rupees 64,180 crore over a period of 5 years. So, in the addition to National Health Mission, this scheme will work towards strengthening public health institutions and governing capacity for wide-ranging diagnostics as well as treatment. It will also include critical care services. So, everything will be included, not only emergency services or public health system institution, but governing capacity will also be wide-ranged, and it will provide diagnostics, treatment, critical care services too. So later goal would be met with the establishment of critical care hospital blocks in 12 central institutions like All India Institute of Medical Science and in government medical colleges and district hospitals in 602 districts. And importance of the laboratories and their lack of readiness during outbreak in terms of having a robust surveillance system and diagnostic interface has never been more pronounced than in recent times. So government will be establishing integrated district public health labs in 730 districts to provide comprehensive laboratory services. Current labs for different programs that shall be integrated to deliver clinical public health surveillance, diagnostic services for predicting outbreaks, epidemics, and more. It means research and development will also be emphasized upon. So this ABHIM, that is Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission, will focus on supporting research on COVID-19 and other infectious diseases that will include biomedical research to generate evidence to inform short-term and medium-term responses to such pandemics. And government also aims to develop a core capacity to deliver the One Health approach to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease outbreaks in humans and animals. So, plan to achieve that biosecurity preparedness and pandemic research strengthening would be realized via 4 regional national institutes for virology and regional research platform for the World Health Organization, Southeast Asia region. So, 9 biosafety safety level third laboratories. So in India's endeavor to keep ahead of infectious organisms that bring our life to halt, it has expanded and building an IT-enabled disease surveillance system is on the cards too. So network of surveillance labs will be developed at the block, district, regional and national levels for detecting, investigating, preventing and combating health emergencies and outbreaks. So surveillance will get a huge boost with 20 metropolitan surveillance units, 5 regional national center for disease control branches, and an integrated health promotion platform in all these states. So this point of entry will be reinforced with 17 new points of entry, health units, upgrading 33 existing units. So upgraded and intensified system of surveillance will be in addition to a state-of-the-art national digital health ecosystem for IT-enabled healthcare services delivery. It will also manage core digital health data and ensure national portability in the provision of health services through secure system of electronic health records. So it will be based on international standards and easily accessible to citizens. So the major highlight of the current pandemic has been the requirement of local capacities in urban areas, and the service from these existing urban primary health centers will be expanded to smaller units What are these? These are Ayushman Bharat Urban Health and Wellness Centers and polyclinics or specialist clinics. So, urban primary health centers will be established closer to the community so that they can meet the needs of the urban population. And polyclinics will guarantee care through improved access to expanded high-ended quality service and establish referral linkages as well. So it will provide a holistic view or holistic function in the healthcare system. So from diagnosis to treatment, everything will be included, and in fact research and development as well. So everything is included in this Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure Mission. Next article, energy cooperation as the backbone of India-Russia ties. Russian companies have the potential to be long-term partners with India in aiding its energy transformations. This is about India-Russia relationship. So context is what? That India had been at the forefront of the transformation of global energy, and it has also strived to diversify its trade relations. So with the abundant energy and energy sources and appetite for trade diversification, who's having that? Russia is having that. So Russia can be an ultimate long-term partner for India. But the bilateral ties requires more support from both the government and corporate leaders to grasp its potential in the field of energy cooperation. So, in the month of September 6th, the Eastern Economic Forum in Russia's Vostok, Indian Prime Minister in the virtual address has said that India-Russia energy partnership can help bring stability to the global energy market. And Indian and Russian energy ministers, they have announced that companies have been pushing for greater cooperation in the oil and gas sector beyond $32 billion already invested in joint projects. So India's Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas, Hardeep Singh Puri, has referred to Russia as the largest investor in India's energy sector. And the novel coronavirus pandemic is still far from over. But an economic recovery has been underway. So India, which is Asia's third largest economy, and it has expanded by more than 20% in the June quarter on a year-to-year basis, and it is expected to grow by around 9% by the end of 2021. So this rate is expected to be higher than China's 8.5%, assuming the effective suppression of COVID-19. So this distinctive feature of this recovery that has been advanced by the quest of energy transformation and environmental concerns, India has increasingly leaning towards green transition since its recovery had started and its appetite for energy had increased. So one of its example we can say of cooperation between the countries in energy transformation is the joint venture between India's Reliance Industries groups and Russia's Cyber, which is country's largest petrochemical producer. They have set up their establishment in Jamnagar, Gujarat, and this venture is leading the first halogenated rubber production facility in South Asia. So this facility has become operational in 2019, and they have achieved a total throughput within the first year. They have established a significant supplier of Bottle River in the Indian market previously, which was dependent on the imports only earlier. So this joint venture will produce somewhere up to 120 kiloliters of this rubber, and somewhere 60% of which could be further converted to halogenated Bottle River that will meet the growing demand for domestic tire manufacturers. So in an interview, one of the members, that is Alexander Petrov, who's cyber member of management board. He is heading the plastics, elastometers, and organic synthesis division. So in his interview, he has said that Reliance Cyber Elastometers is not only supplying most of the Bottle River consumed in the country, but they are also exporting its products to outside. And he also said that this company, that is Cyber, is bringing to India unique technology which is not commercially available in the market and the most advanced in terms of an ecological footprint. So this project will tremendously support the growth of India's auto industry by securing uninterrupted critical raw material supply, which India used to face earlier. And particularly, it is important in the current pandemic. It has multiplied the risk of global supply chain disturbance. So apart from accounting for most of the Indian battle rubber market, Reliance Cyber Elastometers exports its products to Asia, Europe, United States, Brazil, and other countries. So this venture is also promoting halogenated battle rubber, which is more premium product. And this project is clear manifestation of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat initiatives that represents a practical example of technology transfer from Russia to India. India is one of the fastest growing market for this rubber production and halogenated rubber due to its rapid expanding car manufacturing industries that has pushed for electric vehicles. And going further, India is emerging as a critical refining hub in Asia to boost its petrochemical capacity. So presently, country has installed capacity of more than 249.36 with local companies who are planning to significantly expand the capacity by investing more than $27 billion by 2021. And in the past few years, India's refineries have expanded towards petrochemicals to capture additional value. And IEA, that is International Energy Agency, has written in India Energy Outlook 2021 report in February. So this an agency has estimated that India's ethylene production is set to grow by two-thirds over the period of 2030. And Russia's Gazprom and India's ONGC Videsh Limited and Indian Oil Corporation had signed separate memorandums of understanding at Vladivostok. So Mr. Puri has also, Hardeep Puri has also met with Cyber's Management Board Chairman Dmitry Konov at that event. And the effort to transition to green energy, India has recently achieved a significant milestone of completing the countrywide installation of 100 gigawatt of total installed renewable energy capacity that includes large hydro. India is aiming to hit 175 gigawatt of renewable energy target by December 2021 22, and if it will get achieved, then it would be close to half of India's current total installed power capacity. And furthermore, according to the survey of the government in New Delhi, additional investment in renewables up to year 2022 would be about $80 billion. So its commitment to net zero emission could positively impact country's growth trajectory. And the recent Deloitte report that has forecasted that India could gain $11 trillion in economic value over the next 50 years by limiting rising global temperatures and realizing its potential to export decarbonization. So the unknowns of the climate change and threats of a new pandemic suggest that country should accelerate its energy transition. Russia, that is one of the global key players across the energy market, could emerge as an indispensable partner for such a transition. And both the countries have an extensive record of bilateral cooperation in the energy domain. So Russian companies can have that has been involved in the construction of 6 nuclear reactors in Kulan nuclear power project at Tamil Nadu. And of these, Unit 1 and 2 had already been operating at total capacity. Third, Unit 3 is still under construction. So previously, Russian President Vladimir Putin had claimed that Russia is ready to build a dozen reactors in India over the next 20 years. And furthermore, India and Russia had secured the potential of designing a nuclear reactor specifically for developing countries, which is a promising area of cooperation. So India's nuclear power generation capacity of 6,780 megawatt may increase to 22,480 megawatt by 2031. That is contributing to countries' efforts to turn to green energy. And a few years ago, Rosneft invested $12.9 billion in India's second largest private oil refiner, that is SR Oil, which is now renamed as Naira Energy. So they have marked it one of the most significant foreign investments in the years. And in the month of September, almost all of Russia's major energy companies were interested in projects in India. Russia's energy minister, Nikolai Shulginov, has said that Vladivostok Forum in September has added that he sees prospects for energy cooperation in all the areas. So current bilateral exchange rate needs to accelerate for India to grasp its potential from energy transformation. So, despite such progress, coal remains India's most important source of electricity production, and it does not spell good news for the environment because of its carbon emission capacity. So, to meet its growing energy demand and get success in the green transformation, India needs approximately $500 billion of investments in the wind and solar infrastructure, grid expansion, and storage to reach 450 gigawatt capacity target by 2030. So, more efforts are required to expand cooperation with such partners as Russia so that towards green energy, India could work upon. That is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. Now, Pegasus before the security card, court's acknowledgement that the allegations of snooping have some weight to go a long way. So basically, this Pegasus is in the discussion that is blamed, government is blamed that government has somewhere violated the right to privacy of citizens of the country by allowing such snooping, which is Iran-based company, which is having its base in Iran. All right. So, context of this article is what? That in the recent record of Supreme Court on civil liberties had been inspiring, especially where cryptic phrase, that is national security, is uttered. And the rationale has been that government is best placed to assess the impact of national security at it, as it is one of the overseeing all intelligence agencies and enforcement efforts. So court must allow considerable deference rather than coerce the government into sharing details that many comprise national security. Any critique of the country's rationale for deferring to national security is hampered by recent judgments, which is marked by what they omit rather than what they state. So the reasons, these are the reasons. So court's order on 27th October formed a committee to probe the use of military-grade spyware in India on India citizens was refreshing. So basically, Supreme Court has given an order to set up a committee that will look after government's role into it. So it is telling that order begins with the quote from George Orwell's 1984, and allegations against government were indeed Orwellian. At considerable expense, the government infringed the right to privacy of several leading journalists and politicians by deploying spyware on their phones to monitor all communications. So there are even graver allegations that Pegasus was used to implant false documents and evidences on the devices of persons under surveillance. And government supposedly did so through a software which is named as Pegasus, whose developer is the NSO group, purportedly sells it only to certain undisclosed governments and end user of its products, and they are exclusively government intelligence and law enforcement agencies. So constitution mandates that any restrictions on the right to privacy must be through a valid law, and it will need to be necessary to meet a legitimate purpose and be proportionate. That is, there is a proper balance to be achieved between the purpose and harm caused by limiting the right. So that is likely that snooping, if any, through Pegasus may not be sanctioned by any law to begin with, else the government would have filled an affidavit so that to that effect as nudged by the apex court, with else the government would have filed an affidavit to such effect as nudged by the apex court, and instead so this snooping basically, so Pegasus may not be sanctioned by any law to begin with, and government would have filed an affidavit before this. So government has repeatedly relied on a minister's statement in parliament, and they have denied snooping allegations. So representations had been made in parliament, and they have generally protected parliamentary privilege, and consequences for false or misleading statements are rare. So this is unlikely an affidavit in court proceeding where such communication is punishable with imprisonment. So basically, government, as I've said, that Supreme Court has given order to set up a committee to look after the government's role into it, whether government has allowed to snoop in to their citizens, which is violation of right to privacy. Then it has also given a chance to government to file an affidavit in which they have to defend themselves basically against such probes. So, Supreme Court observed that there is a broad consensus between the government and the aggrieved petitioners that unauthorized surveillance or accessing of stored data from devices of citizens for reasons other than nation security would be illegal, objectionable, and matter of concern. So, only question that remained was whether such unauthorized surveillance and access of data had taken place in this case, or to surprise of no one, in the face of evidence of snooping produced by the writ petitioners themselves, government has restored to ritualistic incantation of national security to avoid providing answers in affidavit. So Supreme Court thankfully did not buy these omnibus assertions to desist from interference, and it is said national security cannot be the bugbear that the judiciary shies away from by virtue of its mere mentioning. And rightly, court observed that in a democracy governed by the rule of law, indiscriminate spying of individuals cannot be allowed except with sufficient statutory safeguards that is grounded in legality, necessity, and proportionality. So, where government refuses to divulge the information sought, it is incumbent on the government to not only specifically plead the constitutional concern of statutory immunity but also justify the same in court on affidavit. So court's acknowledgement that allegations of snooping have some weight go a long way, and committees conduct in investigating these allegations must go further. So investigation must be swift and its finding must be made public. So that is all about this article. The next one, what is the climate vulnerability index released by CEEW? So basically, recently, this CEEW, that is Council on Energy, Environment and Water, that is an environmental think tank. So they have carried first of their kind district level climate vulnerability assessment or climate vulnerability assessment. So this is important prelims fact basically. So in this, they have analyzed 640 districts in India, and this analysis has been taken to assess their vulnerability to extreme weather events like cyclones, floods, heat waves, droughts, etc. So any type of natural hazards that has been found out. So this vulnerability index had mapped exposure, which is whether district is prone to extreme weather events, sensitivity, that is likelihood of an impact on the district by weather events, and adaptive capacity, that is the response of coping mechanism of the district. So it has helped map critical vulnerabilities and plan strategies to enhance resilience and adapt a climate proofing communities, economies, and infrastructure. So instead of looking at climate extremes in isolation, study looks at the combined risk of hydromet disasters like flood, cyclones, drought, and their impact. And study does not take into consideration other natural disasters like earthquakes. So, as per German Watch 2020 finding, India is seventh most vulnerable country with respect to climate extremities and extreme weather events that has been increasing in the country. Like super cyclone Amphan had come in Bay of Bengal, which is now strongest cyclone which has recorded in the country. Then recent events had taken place like landslides and floods in Uttarakhand, Kerala. It has also increased in the past decade. So another this CEEW study that has found that 3 out of the 4 districts in India are extreme event hotspots, with 40% of the districts exhibiting a swapping trend, which is traditionally flood-prone areas, and they are witnessing more frequent and intense droughts and vice versa. So IPCC states that every degree rise in temperature will lead to a 3% increase in precipitation, and it causes increased intensification of cyclones and floods. So, as per Climate Vulnerability Index, Assam, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Bihar are most vulnerable to extreme climate events like floods, droughts, and cyclones in India. With 27 Indian states and union territories are vulnerable to extreme climate events, and 463 districts out of 640 are vulnerable to extreme weather events. So, Dhemaji and Nagaon in Assam, Khammam in Telangana, Gajpati in Odisha, Vizianagaram in Andhra Pradesh, Sangli in Maharashtra, and Chennai in Tamil Nadu. These are among India's most climate vulnerability districts. And somewhere more than 80% Indians who are living in the districts which are vulnerable to climate risk, that is 17 of 20 people in India are vulnerable to climate risk, and out of which every 5 Indians live in areas which is extremely vulnerable. So somewhere more than 45% of the districts will have undergone unsustainable landscape and infrastructure changes. 183 hotspots districts are highly vulnerable to more than one extreme climate events, whereas 60% of the Indian districts they have medium to low adaptive capacity in handling extreme weather events, and these districts do not have robust plans in place to mitigate impact. So northeastern states are more vulnerable to floods. South and central are most vulnerable to extreme droughts. 59 and 41 percentage of total districts in the eastern and western states are highly vulnerable to extreme cyclones. So this vulnerability index has ranked 20 states, out of which Assam and Andhra Pradesh are most vulnerable and vulnerable to extreme weather events. And Kerala, Tripura, and West Bengal they are least vulnerable. So study has pointed out that difference in the vulnerability of states that ranked is marginal, and it is making all states vulnerable. But Kerala and West Bengal, they have performed well comparatively despite both being coastal states and dealing with the threat of cyclones and floods annually. So, reason is mentioned why these states have performed better. That is because they have stepped up their climate action plans as well as preparedness to handle all extreme weather events. And index has also taken into account certain indicators when assessing the preparedness of a state or district. These floods or these include availability of critical infrastructure like cyclone, food shelters, government mechanisms in place, including upga- updating of disaster management plans, mitigating strategies, standards, operating procedures before, during, and after an extreme event, like how people and livestock are being evacuated, or how food is being mobilized, and how administration prevents loss of lives and livelihoods. So all such things had been taken care of in these states. So develop a high resolution climate risk atlas to map critical vulnerabilities at the district level and better identify, assess, and project chronic and acute risk like extreme climate events, heat and water stress, crop loss, vector-borne diseases, and biodiversity collapse. So this CRA, that is Climate Risk Atlas, also supported coastal monitoring and forecasting. That is indispensable given the rapid intensification of climate cyclones and other extreme events. So, by establishing a centralized cyclone risk commission to coordinate environmental de-risking mission and undertaking climate sensitivity led landscape restoration, which is focused on rehabilitating address. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, so a centralized climate risk commission has to establish so that they can coordinate the environmental de-risking mission, and by undertaking climate sensitivity led landscape restoration, which is focusing on rehabilitation, restoring, and reintegrating natural ecosystem as part of the developmental process. So integrate climate risk profiling with infrastructure planning to increase adaptive capacity, and it will provide for climate risk interlinked adaptation financing by creating innovative CVI, that is Climate Vulnerability Index based financing instruments that will integrate climate risk for an effective risk transfer mechanism. That is all about this article. Moving on to the next one. What India's new water policy seeks to deliver. So basically, this is about water policy that had come in November 2019 by Ministry of Jal Shakti. So they have set up a committee to draft new national water policy. So context of this article is what is in the new water policy, how it is going to tackle the issues related to water, regarding pollution, regarding distribution, everything. So this was the first time that government has asked a committee of independent experts to draft the policy of on national water, and over a period of 1 year, the committee has received 124 submissionaries by state and central governments and academics and practitioners. So, this national water policy is based on striking consensus that has emerged through these wide ranging deliberations. So, what policy has recognized? Okay, so policy has recognized limits to endlessly increasing water supply and purposes a shift towards demand management. Irrigation that consumes 80 to 90% of India's water, and most of the water is used by rice, wheat, and sugarcane. So, without a radical change in this pattern of water demand, basic water needs of millions of people cannot be met. So, crop diversification is the single most important step in resolving their water crisis. Policy has suggested diversifying public procurement operations to include anti cereals to include nutri-cereals, pulses, and oilseeds. So this would incentivize farmers to diversify their cropping patterns. So farmers will diversify their cropping patterns, and it will result into huge savings of water. So largest outlets for these procured crops are integrated child development services, midday meal scheme, and public distribution system. It will create this link that will also help address the crisis of malnutrition and diabetes, that gives the superior nutritional profile of these crops. So reduce, recycle, reuse has been proposed as the basic um, mantra of integrated urban water supply and wastewater management, with the treatment of sewage and eco restoration of urban river stretches as far as possible through decentralized wastewater management. So all non potable use like flushing, fire protection, vehicle washing, that must mandatorily shift to treated wastewater. So it means these works of water can be shifted from fresh to treated wastewater. All right, so that water wastage can be reduced. So within the supply side options, this national water policy has pointed to trillions of liters stored in big dams which are still not reaching farmers, and explains how irrigated area could be greatly expanded at the low cost by deploying pressurized closed conveyance pipelines combined with supervisory control and data acquisition system and pressurized micro irrigation. So this policy has placed major emphasis on supply of water through nature-based solutions like rejuvenation of catchment areas, to be incentivized through compensation of for ecosystem services. Especially, it will cure blue-green infrastructure like rain gardens and biospheres, and restored rivers with wet meadows, wetlands constructed for bioremediation, urban parks, permeable pavements, green roofs, etc., are proposed for the urban areas. So, policy gives highest priority to sustainable and equitable management of groundwater. Participatory groundwater management is the key information on the aquifer boundaries, boundaries, water storage capacities, and flows provided in a user-friendly manner to stakeholders designated as custodians of the aquifers. That would enable them to develop protocols for effective management of groundwater. So, groundwater discharge is very, very important here. So for the time immemorial, people of India have had a reverential relationship with rivers. Water policy has seen river primarily as a resource to serve economic purpose. And this overwhelmingly instrumentalist view of rivers has led to their terrible degradation. This acknowledging their economic role, this policy accords river protection and revitalization prior and primary importance. Steps to restore river flows include revegetation of catchments, regulation of groundwater extraction, riverbed pumping, and mining of sand and boulders. So, National Water Policy outlines a process to draft a Rights of Rivers Act that includes their right to flow, to meander, and to meet the sea. And this new national water policy considers water quality as the most serious unaddressed issue in India today. It purposes that every water ministry at the center and the states include a water quality department. And policy also advocates adoption of state of the art, low cost, low energy, eco sensitive technologies for sewage treatment. So, widespread use of reverse osmosis has led to a huge water wastage and adverse impact on water quality. Policy wants RO units to be discouraged if the total dissolved solids count in water is less than 500 milligram per liter. It suggests a task force of emerging water contaminants to better understand and tackle the threats they are likely to pose. So, policy makes radical suggestions for reforming governance of water that suffers from three kinds of hydroschizophrenia, that between irrigation and drinking water, surface and groundwater, and also water and wastewater. So, government departments, they are working in silos. They have generally dealt with just one side of these binaries, and rivers, they are drying up because of over extraction of groundwater. Uh, that reduces base flows, which requires for rivers to flow to have flow after the monsoon. And it will also deal with drinking water and sanitation, drinking water and irrigation in silos, which meant as aquifers that provide assured sources of drinking water that dried up because the same aquifer and are used for irrigation that consumes much water. And when water and wastewater are separated in planning, the result is a fall in water quality. So, this national water policy suggests the creation of a unified multidisciplinary, multi stakeholder national water government commission that would become an exemplar for states to follow. Government water departments that include professionals predominantly from civil engineering, hydrology, and hydrogeology. So, without experts in water management, social mobilization, agronomy, soil science, hydrometeorology, public health, river ecology, and ecological economics, solutions to India's complex water problems will remain elusive. So, since systems like water are greater than the sum of their constituent parts, that is solving water problems that requires understanding whole system, and it will deploy multidisciplinary teams and a transdisciplinary approach. So this wisdom on water is not exclusive preserve of any one section of society. Government should build enduring partnership with primary stakeholders of water, who must become an integral part of this national water commission and its counterparts in the states. So, indigenous knowledge of our people with a long history of water management is an invaluable intellectual resource that must be fully leveraged. So that is all about the article, and this is all about the day. So these are all such important articles that had published in past 1 week newspaper in the Hindu as well as Indian Express, and we have discussed here so far. So I hope it is clear. So with this, I am ending this session, and that is all for the day. We'll meet up with another articles on next Sunday. Till then, have a nice weekend. Have a nice day. Bye bye. Take care.